The core mission of the United Nations is neglected. Secretary General Guterres chases vanity projects instead of the UN purpose for peace. The UN General Assembly will convene in New York on September 23, 2024, welcoming world leaders and diplomats from the 193 countries represented at the UN for a week filled with speeches and minimal world relevance, a common outcome of these meetings. Prior to the meeting, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres held his pet project Summit of the Future in overstated fanfare. The General Secretary billed the summit as a, quote, once-in-a-generation opportunity, end quote, to change human history by restarting international cooperation and embracing multilateralism. The pact included 56 actions, including the aforementioned multilateralism, but also including upholding the UN Charter, peacekeeping, climate change, disarmament, regulating artificial intelligence, and reforms to both financial institutions and the UN Security Council. At the end of the summit, the UN Assembly adopted the Pact of the Future as a non-binding measure, highlighting the UN's impotence and Secretary General Guterres' failure to fulfill the basic role of his position or the UN. The two world wars, which resulted in unparalleled casualties, even among the winners, inspired the creation of the United Nations. The goal was to establish an organization that could avert wars, establish a framework for conflict resolution without violence, and if disagreements arise, employ global cooperation to halt aggression. Economic and social advancement is part of the Charter, but the main role of the UN is to promote world peace and prevent war. The Security Council, comprising of 15 countries, wields significant power in the current UN organization. 10 non-permanent members hold 2-year terms, while 5 permanent members comprised of China, France, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States represent the 5 victor countries. These 5 permanent members possess veto powers, which allows them to halt any UN action, regardless of the decisions made by the other 14 members. This power is a primary source of dysfunction in the United Nations, hindering its ability to uphold the fundamental charter goal of maintaining global peace. The General Assembly, which comprises of the 193 nations around the world and is considered the main policy body of the United Nations, is the other part of the UN. The UN Secretary General, not necessarily an executive like a president or a prime minister, leads the United Nations as the chief administrator. According to the rules set forth in the UN Charter, the Secretary General cannot be a citizen of any of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. The UN Charter also states that the Secretary General may bring to the attention of the Security Council any matter which, in his opinion, may threaten the maintenance of international peace and security, end quote. Although the Secretary General cannot set the agenda for the Security Council or override a veto, their primary role is to work closely with it to maintain global peace and security. Primary mission of the UN is to prevent war, promote peace, and intervene when necessary to end a conflict. So there are currently 45 conflicts in the world, with 3 most significant being the Ukraine war, Sudan, and Gaza war, which combined are creating 2,000 casualties a day. Against this backdrop, UN Secretary General Guterres is focusing his influence on the efforts on the Pact for the Future, relegating global peace and security to a secondary concern at best, with climate change and structural reform at the core of Guterres' agenda. Even if climate change is considered a member nation's primary concern, the UN's purpose, again, is peace and security, not climate change, not AI regulation, or financial reform. It is peace and security, again. While some of these issues may have connection to long-term security concerns, they do not impact the current situation, where conflicts claim the lives of at least 2,000 people a day, dead and wounded. The UN should focus on these issues. These are also, again, the core mission. One could argue that the UN is capable of multitasking, provided it operates competently and prioritizes its primary mission. However, the UN lacks competent leadership and management, and it should avoid excessive focus on peripheral issues that may or may not affect the future peace and security. All other endeavors, until the UN can competently address its core role, are a waste of resources and potentially belong to another international body. Alternatively, they could become national issues for negotiations among nations, who then formulate their own policies to address their respective national priorities. With adequate reason, supporters of the UN's expansive missions will argue that the 5 permanent security member councils veto power, the introduction of bipolar politics, and the obstruction of any serious attempt to bring about peace have broken the UN organizational structure. The critics of the Security Council are right, but it is in the UN structure, which the Secretary General accepted by the very nature of accepting the position of Secretary General. Part of his Pact of the Future is Security Council reform, but is this really a serious focus of Secretary Guterres? The Security Council, with its 5 members empowered to veto any proposed reform, must approve it. Institutions rarely give up power, so it is doubtful that the permanent 5 would take any serious reform, especially if it took away their power. And even if they did, how does having rotating groups of veto-wielding countries on the Security Council improve the prospect of peace or multilateralism? Hint, it doesn't. This reform effort squanders focus by ignoring the UN's basic core functions. Another point to consider is that Secretary General Guterres is not even committed to using his position to promote peace, as he rarely travels to Russia or Ukraine to use his position to elevate peace and security. He has not visited Ukraine since 2023, nor has he been to Russia since 2022. He has not visited Israel since the war in Gaza, and has only been to Egypt to visit the Egyptian side of the Gaza Strip to review UN relief supplies destined for Gaza. Guterres has not visited Sudan since 2017. His primary role as chief administrator, again, is to promote the UN's mission, and he has shown that he is not willing to jeopardize his personal reputation or safety in the pursuit of peace, unlike prior UN Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld, who lost his life in a plane crash during a peace mission in the Congo in 1961. Whether it is a disregard for the UN mission that he accepted or his fear for his personal reputation and safety to not do the hard work for world peace, Secretary General Guterres is just another long list of UN Secretary Generals who are little more than perfunctory bureaucrats who serve a bureaucracy for the needs of the bureaucracy and are not set about meeting the purpose of why the UN was created in the first place. The excuse of organizational structure is ill-suited for the organizational purpose cannot be the excuse of why Secretary General or Secretary Generals in the past cannot radically pursue peace and security. If the structure of the Security Council presents such a barrier, the Secretary General should utilize their platform to relentlessly advocate for peace. They should also leverage their position to exert external pressure on the Security Council, compelling them to either adopt a stance against peace, which is not necessarily a good idea, or devise a viable solution for the UN to resolve the conflict. Peace, whether through negotiating a settlement, peacekeeping missions such as the mission in Kosovo, or intervention to stop hostile invasion like the Korean War, is hard and it takes work. But it is not an excuse not to even try, more outrageously ignore the pursuit of peace, to chase vanity projects that are not even part of the UN and the Secretary General's core purpose.